Sarah stepped off the dusty coach, clutching a carpet bag that held two lives: the woman she'd been, and the woman she'd promised to become. The late summer heat pressed down on Redemption Flats like a heavy hand. Dust devils spun lazy circles in the street. The town looked smaller than she'd imagined, more isolated. A general store, a church with a crooked steeple, scattered houses weathered gray by sun and wind. Beyond the buildings, endless prairie stretched to a horizon that seemed both liberating and terrifying. Mrs. Brennan. She turned. The man approaching was tall and lean, weathered like the buildings around them. His face held the kind lines of someone who'd known sorrow and survived it. Ekalis beat. Yao. Behind him stood a small boy, maybe 7, with serious eyes that studied her carefully. "I'm Thomas Brennan," the man said, removing his hat. "This is my son, Daniel." Sarah managed a smile. "Sarah Mitchell. Or Sarah Brennan, I suppose." "Soon enough." Thomas's voice was gentle. "Welcome to Redemption Flats. It's not much, but it's home." Daniel said nothing, just watched her with those old eyes and a young face. She recognized grief when she saw it. The boy was still carrying his mother's absence like a stone in his pocket. "Rekaigestarp for dying." Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house showed Sarah to a small room. "Wedding's in 3 days." The older woman said cheerfully, "Thomas is a good man. Lost his wife 2 years back? That boy needs a mother." When the door closed, Sarah set the carpet bag on the narrow bed. Her hands trembled as she unbuckled the straps. Inside, beneath a simple wedding dress and practical clothing, lay the leather medical bag that had been her constant companion for 5 years. She lifted it out, feeling its familiar weight. The brass clasp gleamed in the lamplight. Inside, a stethoscope, surgical instruments, bottles of quinine and laudanum, anatomy texts with her annotations filling the margins. Evidence of a life she'd worked so hard to build and then fled when it crumbled. The stethoscope felt cool against her palm. She held it up to the lamplight, watching it cast dual shadows on the wall. 2 images, 2 identities. Doctor and bride, healer and woman hiding her healing. In St. Louis, they'd discovered she'd studied medicine at the women's college. The Holbrook family prominent, wealthy. Her employer had dismissed her immediately. "Unnatural," Mrs. Holbrook had said, her voice dripping disgust. What respectable man would want a wife who dissects cadavers? Sarah had left that night. Found Thomas's advertisement in the matrimonial pages. Yo, widowed rancher seeks kind woman for wife and mother to young son. Must be hard-working and gentle-hearted. No doctors within 2 days' ride. That last line had seemed like providence, or perhaps just irony. She carefully placed the stethoscope back in the bag, added the instruments, the bottles, the books. Each item felt like a piece of herself being locked away. When everything was packed, she carried the bag to the trunk at the foot of the bed. The lock clicked shut with a sound like finality. Tomorrow she would explore the town, meet the people who would become her neighbors, begin the life she'd promised Thomas in her carefully worded letters, the letters that mentioned her. Tender, heart, and experience caring for the sick, without ever using the word doctor. She turned down the lamp, leaving only moonlight to silver the small room. The trunk sat in shadow, its locked contents already feeling like something from another lifetime. Tomorrow, she would marry a stranger. Tonight, she buried the woman she'd been. Sarah woke to church bells and morning heat already building. She dressed in a simple blue cotton dress and ventured into town, needing to understand the place that would become her home. The general store smelled of coffee and dried goods. A handful of women clustered near the fabric bolts, their conversation stopping when Sarah entered. She felt their curious eyes. Heard the whispers resume as she passed. "You must be Thomas's bride," said the woman behind the counter. She was perhaps 50, with kind eyes and capable hands. "I'm Margaret Hartley. Folks call me Widow Hartley. And Sarah Mitchell." She extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you. Thomas is lucky to have found you. That boy needs mothering. And Thomas needs—" Widow Hartley paused delicately. "Well, he needs someone." They talked for a few minutes about the town, the weather, the upcoming harvest. Then a woman burst through the door, carrying a small girl of perhaps 5. "Margaret, I need your help. Emma's burning with fever." The child's face was flushed crimson, her eyes glassy. Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately, cataloging symptoms before she could stop herself. High fever, lethargy, slight rash beginning on the chest. The girl whimpered softly, and Sarah's hands ached to examine her properly. "Bring her to the back room," Widow Hartley said calmly. "I'll brew some willow bark tea." As they passed, Sarah caught a glimpse of the rash spreading up the girl's neck. Her breath caught. She knew that pattern, the timing, the presentation. The telltale strawberry texture beginning to show, scarlet fever. And if one child had it, others would follow. The disease spread like wildfire through communities, especially where children gathered. School, church, the general store. Sarah forced herself to remain still, to say nothing. Widow Hartley seemed competent with herbs and basic remedies. But Sarah could already see the limitations. Willow bark would help with fever, but proper hydration protocols, monitoring for complications, understanding the stages of the disease, those required medical training. She made her excuses and left, her mind racing. At the schoolhouse, she found confirmation of her fears. 2 more children had been sent home that morning. The teacher explained, "Same symptoms as little Emma. Must be something going around." That evening, Sarah sat at supper with Thomas and Daniel in the modest ranch house that would soon be hers. Thomas had prepared a simple meal: beans, cornbread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. "I met Widow Hartley today," Sarah said, keeping her voice casual. "She was treating a sick child. Yet Margaret's the closest thing we have to a doctor." Thomas replied, "Good woman. Knows herbs and healing better than anyone." "What if someone needs more than herbs?" Thomas set down his fork. Nearest real doctor is Doc Carson in Silver City. 2 days' ride. And he's got his hands full there. We mostly rely on Margaret and prayer. Been that way since I came here 10 years ago. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. 2 days to the nearest physician. In an outbreak. 2 days might as well be 2 years. Children could die waiting for help. That would arrive too late. Daniel pushed beans around his plate, quiet as always. He glanced up at Sarah, then away. Still uncertain of this stranger who would become his new mother. You all right?" Thomas asked, noting her expression. "Just tired from the journey." She lied. That night in her boarding house room, Sarah lit the lamp and unlocked the trunk. Her medical texts lay on top, their leather covers worn smooth from years of study. She opened the one on infectious diseases, finding the chapter on scarlet fever. The words confirmed her diagnosis. Highly contagious. Spread through respiratory droplets. Most dangerous to children under 10 without proper treatment. Complications included rheumatic fever, kidney damage, death. Current cases in town 3 confirmed, likely more undiagnosed. Required intervention quarantine protocols, aggressive hydration, fever management, monitoring for secondary infections, available medical personnel. 1 herbalist with good intentions and no formal training. Sarah traced the anatomical drawings with 1 finger, remembering her professor's voice. Knowledge unused is knowledge wasted. Miss Mitchell, you have a gift. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, but that gift had cost her everything in St. Louis. Would it cost her everything here too? She closed the book and returned it to the trunk, locked it again, made her choice. She knew what was coming. Scarlet fever didn't ask permission, and it didn't spare children. But revealing herself now, before she'd even married Thomas, would risk everything. He might send her away. The town might reject her. She'd be alone again, and Daniel would lose another chance at a mother. She blew out the lamp and climbed into bed. Tomorrow was her wedding day. She would become Sarah Brennan, Thomas's wife, Daniel's new mother. The doctor would stay locked in the trunk. Silence would keep her safe. The wedding took place in the small church with its crooked steeple. Bet that. A handful of townspeople attended, curious about Thomas's mail-order bride. Sarah wore the simple dress from her carpet bag and held a bouquet of wildflowers Daniel had picked that morning, his first shy gesture toward acceptance. Remedies. The Reverend spoke about duty and partnership, faith and perseverance. Thomas slid a plain gold band onto Sarah's finger. His hands were calloused but gentle when he kissed her. It was brief and respectful, a promise of patience. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Brennan," he whispered. That afternoon, Sarah moved her few belongings into the ranch house. It was modest but clean. 3 small rooms and a kitchen. Everything worn but cared for. Thomas gave her the bedroom while he took the loft. "Until you're ready," he said simply. And she was grateful for his consideration. Daniel watched from the doorway as she unpacked. When she lifted out the locked trunk, the boy's eyes followed it with curiosity, but he asked no questions. "Can I help?" he finally ventured. "I'd like that very much." They worked together in companionable silence. Daniel showed her where things belonged, pointing out the kitchen supplies his mother had organized. His finger traced a set of preserving jars on the shelf. "Mama made strawberry jam," he said softly. "I miss it." Sarah's heart contracted. "Maybe we could make some together when the berries come back." The boy's face lit with cautious hope. Really, that evening. As Sarah prepared supper, a simple stew with vegetables from the garden, Thomas came in with news from town. His face was troubled. 4 more children sick, he said, including the blacksmith's twins. Same fever Emma had. Widow Hartley's running herself ragged trying to help everyone. Sarah's hand froze over the pot. 4 more. Margaret says she's never seen sickness spread so fast. Thomas hung his hat on the peg by the door. Asked if you might help her tomorrow. Just basic care sitting with families. Fetching water. Keeping folks comfortable. Woman's work, he added. Then quickly. Helpful work. Of course. Sarah managed. I'm happy to help. After supper. She helped Daniel prepare for bed. The boy's room was small and tidy, with a carved wooden horse on the windowsill and a faded quilt his mother had made. Daniel climbed under the covers and looked up at her with those serious eyes. Will you be my mama now? He asked. His voice barely above a whisper. The question pierced her. This child, already scarred by loss, was offering his trust, and she was about to betray him with silence. Watching children sicken, while she hid her ability to help. Yes, she whispered, smoothing his dark hair. If you'll have me, he nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching him drift toward sleep in the main room. She could hear Thomas moving about, settling in for the night. This was her family now, her home, the place she'd traveled 1,000 miles to find. And outside, in the gathering darkness, scarlet fever was spreading through the Children of Redemption flats like wildfire through dry grass. She walked to the bedroom and closed the door. The trunk sat at the foot of the bed, its brass lock gleaming in the lamplight. Inside lay everything she'd trained for, everything she could do, the knowledge to save lives, the tools to heal. Her fingers traced the lock's cool metal. One turn of the key, and she could help. One moment of courage, and children would live. But one revelation, and she might lose everything she'd just gained. Sarah withdrew her hand, climbed into bed, stared at the ceiling while moonlight painted silver squares on the wall. Tomorrow she would go to Widow Hartley. She would sit with sick children. She would hold cool cloths to fevered foreheads and whisper comforting words. Imaiden. She would do what any kind-hearted woman would do, and she would watch them suffer with treatments she knew were inadequate, while the cure sat locked in a trunk at the foot of her bed. She closed the trunk lid in her mind and turned the key. The click echoed like a cell door closing. Or perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her. Like a coffin lid, within a week, 12 children were sick. Sarah spent her days moving between houses with Widow Hartley, learning the full scope of the epidemic. The older woman was tireless, brewing endless pots of willow bark tea, applying cool compresses, offering prayers and comfort. But Sarah could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the helpless frustration when another child worsened despite her best efforts. I don't understand it, Margaret said one afternoon, slumping in the kitchen of the grocer's home. I'm doing everything I know, but it's not enough. Sarah wanted to scream. She knew what would help: aggressive hydration to prevent kidney damage, proper positioning to ease breathing, recognition of danger signs that required immediate intervention, hygiene protocols to slow the spread. Instead, she said, you're doing all you can. The grocer's son, Timothy, lay in the next room, 6 years old, with the characteristic rash now covering his small body. His breathing was labored, his lips cracked from dehydration. Sarah had watched him deteriorate over 3 days while they applied cool cloths and spooned weak tea into his mouth. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. That evening, Thomas found her on the porch, staring out at the prairie. The sun was setting in shades of gold and red, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. You've been quiet, he said, settling beside her. Is it too much seeing the children so sick? No, she said quickly. I mean, it's hard, but I want to help. You are helping. Margaret told me you're a natural at caring for the sick. Said you have gentle hands and a calm presence. Gentle hands. If only he knew what these hands could do with proper tools and permission. Mi puasti. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. You're good with Daniel, too. He asked me last night if you were staying forever. I think he's starting to believe you won't leave. Ada. The guilt twisted deeper. I'm not going anywhere. Good, Thomas smiled, and she saw genuine affection in his eyes. I know this wasn't the welcome you expected. Arriving to find half the town sick, but you've handled it with grace. I'm grateful you're here. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into caregiving. Families began requesting her specifically, saying she had a way with the sick ones that brought comfort. She sat long hours at bedsides, monitoring breathing, checking temperatures with her hand since she couldn't use her thermometer, assessing symptoms with eyes trained to catch danger signs. And each night, she went home to Thomas and Daniel, played the role of wife and mother, and said nothing about what she truly saw. The blacksmith's daughter, Emma, took a turn for the worse. Sarah had been there when the convulsions started, the little girl's body rigid with fever-induced seizures. Widow Hartley had done her best, but Sarah could see the panic in her eyes. I don't know what else to do," Margaret whispered while Emma's mother sobbed. Sarah excused herself, went outside, and pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from shouting the truth. She knew exactly what to do. Phenobarbital to stop the seizures, aggressive cooling, electrolyte management. But she had no permission to act, no standing to suggest treatments that would reveal her training. That night, she lay awake beside Thomas. They'd begun sharing a bed, though still tentatively, still carefully. His breathing was slow and even, exhausted from a day helping families haul water and supplies. Sarah stared at the ceiling and counted children. 12 sick. 2 worsening. Emma near death. She had the knowledge to save them, and still, she did nothing. Her hand crept out from under the blanket, reaching toward the trunk at the foot of the bed. In the darkness, she could just make out its shape. The key hung on a ribbon around her neck, hidden beneath her nightgown. One turn of that key. That's all it would take. But the cost might be everything she'd found here. Thomas's trust, Daniel's tentative love, her place in this community. Sarah pulled her hand back, closed her eyes, made the same choice she'd made every day since arriving. Tomorrow. She promised herself, if it gets worse tomorrow, I'll speak up. But tomorrow came, and she stayed silent, and the children kept burning with fever while the cure lay locked away, and Sarah felt pieces of her soul crumbling like dry earth beneath an unforgiving sun. On the 8th night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Thomas, dressed in darkness, and slipped out into the night. The town was quiet except for the sound of her footsteps and the occasional bark of a distant dog. In Oramirancho, a lamp still burned in the blacksmith's window. Sarah stood in the street, staring at that golden light. Inside, Emma lay fighting for her life. The convulsions had stopped, but the fever hadn't broken. Widow Hartley had gone home hours ago, exhausted beyond measure. Sarah's feet carried her forward before her mind could argue. She knocked softly. Emma's mother, Helen, opened the door with red-rimmed eyes. "Mrs. Brennan? It's late. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd sit with her a while. Give you a rest." Relief flooded Helen's face. "Bless you. I'll just close my eyes for a moment." Within minutes, the exhausted woman was asleep in a chair. Emma's father snored softly in the next room. Sarah was alone with the unconscious child. She stood there for a long moment, listening to Emma's labored breathing. Then she made her choice. Sarah slipped out the door and ran home through darkness, grabbed her medical bag from the locked trunk with shaking hands, returned to the blacksmith's house before anyone stirred. She worked by lamplight, her trained hands steady despite her racing heart. Proper temperature check 104 degrees. Dangerously high. She prepared a graduated cooling regimen, not the shock treatment that could do more harm than good. mixed a precise dose of fever reducer from her supplies, positioned Emma to ease breathing and reduce aspiration risk. Then she monitored, adjusted, waited. At dawn, Emma's fever broke. The child's breathing eased. Color began returning to her face. Helen woke to find her daughter sleeping peacefully. The crisis passed. She sobbed with relief, praising God and Widow Hartley. Sarah said nothing, gathered her things, and slipped away before full light. She'd crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. Over the next week, Sarah became a shadow healer. When families slept, she treated their children properly. When they woke, she was gone, leaving them to credit prayer or Margaret's remedies. 3 more children pulled back from the brink. Word spread quietly through town something had changed. The sick ones were improving. Maybe Widow Hartley had found new methods. Maybe prayers were finally being answered. Sarah told herself it was necessary. She was helping without causing disruption, saving lives without forcing the community to accept what they might reject. The perfect compromise. But the lies weighed on her. She lied to Thomas about where she went at night. Just checking on families, she'd say. Which was true, but incomplete. She lied to Widow Hartley about why certain treatments suddenly seemed more effective. She lied to herself about whether this double life was sustainable. One evening, Margaret caught her hand while they prepared herbs. "You have a gift," the older woman said softly. "I've been doing this 20 years, and I've never seen anyone with your intuition about illness. It's like you know things before they happen." Sarah's throat tightened. "I just pay attention. It's more than that." Margaret studied her with knowing eyes. "My grandmother was a healer too. She always said some people are called to it, born with knowledge in their blood. Your grandmother sounds wise. She also said hiding your gifts does nobody any good, not yourself, and certainly not those who need you." Sarah met her gaze, saw the question there. But before she could respond, someone called from outside another sick child needed tending. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table while Thomas and Daniel slept. Her medical bag lay open before her. She'd grown careless, bringing it into the house instead of keeping it locked away. But she was so tired of hiding, so exhausted by the constant deception. Her journal lay beside the bag. She'd been documenting cases, tracking the epidemic's progression with clinical precision. 12 cases initially, 17 now, but the mortality rate 0. Every child she treated secretly had survived. She should feel triumph. Instead, she felt hollowed out. "Hey, Sarah." Sarah. She jumped. Thomas stood in the doorway, lantern in hand. His eyes went to the medical bag, the instruments gleaming in lamplight, the journal filled with medical notations. For a long moment, neither spoke. "What is that?" he finally asked. Sarah's hands trembled. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. She could lie, make up some excuse, or she could trust him with the truth. "It's mine," she whispered. "It's who I am." Thomas stepped closer, his face unreadable. He picked up the stethoscope, turning it in his rough hands. "I don't understand." "I'm a doctor. Thomas, I trained at the Women's Medical College in St. Louis. I've been practicing medicine for 5 years. The words tumbled out faster now. "I hid it because I was afraid. In St. Louis, they discovered what I was, and they destroyed me for it. I thought if you knew, you'd reject me too, so I stayed silent. And then the children got sick. And I couldn't just watch them die. She was crying now, words and tears mixing together. I've been treating them at night, secretly. All those improvements everyone's talking about. That was me. I saved Emma. I saved the grocer's son. I've been lying to you and Margaret and everyone. And I'm so sorry. Thomas, I'm so sorry. He set down the stethoscope carefully. His silence was worse than anger. Say something. Sarah begged. Please. Thomas pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He stared at the medical instruments for a long time. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were filled with something she couldn't read. You saved those children. Yes. You've been doing it alone in the dark, while letting everyone think it was something else. Yes. He shook his head slowly. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid you'd send me away, that you'd think I was unnatural, or wrong, or... Sarah. He reached across the table and took her hands. You saved children's lives. You're using knowledge and skill to heal the sick. How could that be wrong? She stared at him, not daring to believe. I don't understand why you felt you had to hide. He continued. But I understand fear. I understand protecting yourself after being hurt. He squeezed her hands gently. What I don't understand is how you've carried this alone. How you've watched children suffer and known you could help, but stayed silent to protect yourself. That must have been torture. It was, she whispered. Thomas stood, pulling her up with him. No more hiding. Not from me. Whatever else you need to do, we do it together. You hear me? Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. He held her while she wept for the relief, the fear, the exhaustion of weeks of deception. Daniel appeared in his nightshirt, rubbing sleepy eyes. Oh, why is Sarah crying? Thomas lifted the boy onto his hip. Because sometimes grown-ups carry heavy things, and it feels good to finally set them down. Daniel patted Sarah's shoulder with solemn care. It's okay. You're home now. Dane. And despite everything still uncertain, everything still at risk, Sarah felt the truth of those words. She was home, and for the first time since arriving. She was wholly herself. The relief lasted exactly 2 days. Daniel woke on Tuesday morning with a fever. Sarah knew immediately. She'd been watching for it, dreading it, knowing that in their small house with close quarters, infection was nearly inevitable. But knowing didn't make it easier. When she pressed her hand to her stepson's forehead and felt the telltale heat. Thomas, she called, her voice steady through sheer force of will. He appeared in the doorway, took one look at Daniel's flushed face, and went pale. No, not him. Please God, not him. Sarah had already begun assessment. Fever present, but not extreme yet. Early stage rash appearing on torso, mild lethargy, but responsive. If this followed the pattern of other cases, they had perhaps 12 hours before the crisis point. I need my medical supplies, she said. All of them. And I need you to trust me. Thomas nodded mutely. He'd lost his first wife to illness. The terror of losing his son was written clearly on his face. By afternoon, Daniel's condition had worsened. The fever climbed steadily. The rash spread. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his dead mother, sometimes reaching for Sarah with small, hot hands. Widow Hartley arrived, summoned by Thomas. She took one look at Daniel and her face fell. Like Shibondi Nahai. I'll do what I can, she said quietly. But Sarah heard the doubt in her voice. I'll help, Sarah said for the first time. She worked openly. She used her thermometer. Explaining readings to Margaret, she demonstrated proper hydration techniques. She monitored Daniel's breathing and heart rate with her stethoscope. Teaching the older woman what to listen for, Margaret watched with sharp eyes. She asked no questions. But Sarah saw understanding dawn in her expression. As evening fell, Daniel worsened. His fever spiked to 105. His breathing grew labored. He cried out in delirium, thrashing weakly against the blankets. Thomas sat beside the bed. Gripping his son's hand, his face was carved from stone, but tears tracked silently down his weathered cheeks. He's all I have left, he whispered. If he dies, he's not going to die. Sarah spoke with a certainty she didn't entirely feel. She'd saved other children. Yes, but this was Daniel. This was her son now. And the weight of that love made her hands shake as she worked. By midnight, the house was silent except for Daniel's labored breathing. Widow Hartley had gone to check on other patients, promising to return at dawn. Thomas had finally dozed off in his chair, exhausted by fear. Sarah sat beside Daniel's bed, monitoring every breath. The lamplight cast long shadows. Through the window, she could see lights in other houses, other families dealing with their own sick children. She thought about the town gathering that would happen soon. People were starting to whisper. Too many children saved. Too many impossible recoveries. And now Thomas's new wife, the quiet bride. Working openly with medical instruments no simple woman should possess, the questions would come. The judgment might follow, but watching Daniel struggle for breath, Sarah couldn't bring herself to care. Let them talk. Let them judge. This child needed her, and nothing else mattered. Please. She whispered to the lamp flame. To God. To whoever might be listening. Let me save him. I'll face whatever comes after. Just let me save him. Daniel coughed. A wet, rattling sound that made Sarah's heart stutter. She adjusted his position, cleared his airway, checked his vital signs. The fever held steady at 105. Too high. Dangerously high. She applied cooling cloths, administered precise doses of fever reducer, monitored for seizures. Hour after hour, she battled the disease with every skill she possessed, and slowly, agonizingly. The fever began to respond. By 3 a.m., it had dropped to 103. By 4 to 101, when dawnlight crept through the window. Daniel's temperature read 99 degrees, still elevated, but no longer critical. The boy opened his eyes. Sarah. His voice was a thin whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. I had bad dreams. I know, but you're safe now. Daniel's hand found hers. You made the scary go away. Sarah pressed her forehead to his small hand and wept. Thomas woke to find his son sleeping peacefully, fever broken. He looked at Sarah with wonder and gratitude so profound it hurt to witness. Ba Tsaina, you saved him, he said hoarsely. Yes. How? What did you? He gestured helplessly at the medical instruments scattered across the bedside table. I used everything I know, Sarah said simply. Everything I trained for. Everything I am. Thomas crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. Thank you, God. Sarah. Thank you. But even as she held him, Sarah heard voices outside, footsteps approaching, A knock at the door. Word had spread. Thomas's son was sick. Thomas's wife had saved him, and people wanted to know how. The reckoning had arrived. The knock came again, more insistent. Thomas opened the door to find half the town on his doorstep. Widow Hartley stood at the front, her face carefully neutral. Behind her, the blacksmith, the grocer, several mothers whose children Sarah had treated, and at the back, some faces harder to read, the banker's wife who'd always been cold to Sarah. The Reverend with his stern expression. "We heard Daniel was sick," Margaret said carefully. "We came to see how he's faring." "He's better." Thomas said, "Fever broke at dawn." A murmur ran through the crowd. The blacksmith's wife, Helen, stepped forward. "Thomas, we need to talk to your wife." Sarah appeared in the doorway, still in her night clothes, exhausted but steady. "I'm here." "Is it true?" Helen asked. "What Margaret told us, that you're a trained doctor." Sarah met her eyes. No more hiding. No more half-truths. "Yes." The crowd shifted. Voices rising, some angry, some confused, all demanding answers. Why didn't you say something? How long have you been lying? What else have you hidden? How do we know we can trust?" "Enough." Widow Hartley's voice cut through the noise. "Let her speak." Sarah stepped out onto the porch. The morning sun was bright, making her squint. She thought about running, about making excuses, about deflecting. But Daniel was alive in the house behind her, and Emma was healthy, and the grocer's son was recovering. She'd saved them. She'd done what doctors do, and she was done apologizing for it. "I trained at the Women's Medical College in St. Louis," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "I studied for 5 years, graduated top of my class, worked as a physician, until the family I worked for discovered my credentials and destroyed my reputation." She paused, letting the words sink in. Some faces showed sympathy. Others remained hard. "I came here to hide," she continued. "I thought, if I could just be Thomas's wife, Daniel's mother, if I could be normal enough and quiet enough, I'd finally belong somewhere. But then children started dying, and I couldn't—" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't watch them die when I knew how to help." "So you've been treating them?" the Reverend asked. "Well, Nanya, all this time?" "Yes. At night. In secret. I saved Emma when she was seizing. I saved Timothy. I saved 6 other children who were headed toward crisis. And last night, I saved Daniel. She saved my daughter." Helen said quietly, "I don't care how. I'm just grateful." "Yes, sir." The grocer stepped forward. "My Timothy would be dead without her. That's all I need to know." But the banker's wife wasn't satisfied. "It's unnatural. Women aren't meant to be doctors. It goes against God's order." "Does it?" Sarah challenged. "God gave me a mind, gave me hands, gave me the capacity to learn and heal. Is it unnatural to use the gifts I was given? Or is it unnatural to bury them in fear while children die?" The banker's wife had no answer. "I should have been honest from the start," Sarah admitted. "I was wrong to hide, wrong to lie, wrong to make you all think the improvements were luck or prayer. I'm sorry for the deception, but I'm not sorry for saving lives." The crowd was silent now, uncertain. "The epidemic isn't over," Sarah continued. There are still children sick, still families suffering, and whether you like it or not, whether you trust me or not, I'm the only one in 2 days' ride who has the training to help them. She took a breath. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. I'm asking you to let me help, openly. I'll teach Widow Hartley everything I know so the town has skills even after I'm gone. I'll hold clinics to teach basic hygiene and disease prevention. I'll serve this community with everything I have. She paused. Or I'll leave quietly. It's your choice. Pa. Thomas moved to stand beside her, Daniel in his arms. The boy looked small and fragile, wrapped in a blanket. This is my wife, Thomas said, his voice carrying steel. She saved my son. She saved your children. And if you're fool enough to send her away, because she's got knowledge in her head, instead of just in her heart, then this town deserves the suffering it'll get. Daniel, gathering his courage, spoke in his thin child's voice. Sarah's not bad. She's good. She makes people better. Widow Hartley stepped forward. I've been healing folks for 20 years, she said. And I'm telling you, now, I don't know half what this woman knows. She's got real training, real skill. And she's been using it to save your children while y'all sat comfortable in your prejudice. She turned to face the crowd. My pride was hurt when I figured it out. Won't lie about that. But then I thought about Emma seizing in my arms, and me not knowing what to do. And I thought about how many children might have died if Sarah hadn't been here. Margaret's eyes swept over the assembled townspeople. So here's what I say. We've got a doctor, a real one, in our town, and we're arguing about whether that's proper instead of thanking God for the blessing. Seems to me our priorities are all wrong. The Reverend cleared his throat. The woman's got a point. 3 points. The blacksmith added. First, my daughter's alive. Second, this town needs a doctor and we've got one. Third, I'm not fool enough to chase her off because she wears a dress instead of trousers. A 1 by 1. The crowd shifted. Not everyone the banker's wife remained stony-faced, and a few others looked unconvinced, but enough. Enough families whose children had been saved. Enough people willing to choose gratitude over prejudice. The grocer spoke up. All in favor of asking Mrs. Brennan to stay on as our town doctor. Hands rose, slowly at first. Then more. Finally. Even the Reverend raised his hand. Opposed. The banker's wife and 2 others kept their arms down. But they were the minority. Then it settled. The grocer said, Welcome. Dr. Brennan. The title hit Sarah like a physical blow. Dr. Brennan. She'd thought she'd never hear those words again. She'd buried that identity in a trunk and tried to forget it existed. But here, in this dusty frontier town, people were calling her doctor, not with scorn or disgust, but with respect. With gratitude, with hope. Thomas squeezed her hand. Daniel snuggled against his father's shoulder, watching Sarah with those serious eyes that now held complete trust. Thank you. Sarah managed. I won't let you down. You already haven't, Helen said simply. As the crowd dispersed, Widow Hartley lingered. So, she said with a slight smile, you're ready to teach an old woman some new tricks. Sarah laughed, the sound breaking through her exhaustion. Ready to learn from a wise woman who's been healing folks since before I was born. They shook hands, 2 healers acknowledging each other, Then Margaret pulled her into a hug. "Oh, welcome home, Dr. Brennan," she whispered. "Real welcome. This time..." And Sarah, for the first time since arriving in Redemption Flats, felt the truth of those words settle deep into her bones. She was home. She was seen. She was accepted. All of her 3 weeks later. Sarah stood in what used to be the church's back room and was now Redemption Flats' first official clinic. Yorkshire and Macaw. The townspeople had cleaned and furnished it together, examining table built by the blacksmith, cabinets for supplies donated by the grocer, clean linens sewn by the women's quilting circle. Someone had even painted a sign for the door. Dr. Sarah Brennan, physician. Every time she saw it, her throat tightened with gratitude. The epidemic had finally passed. 17 children total had fallen ill. All 17 survived. Not one death a miracle. By frontier standards, Margaret had said, not a miracle. Sarah had replied, just medicine. Properly applied. But she understood what Margaret meant. In a town 2 days from the nearest doctor, with scarlet fever running unchecked. The odds should have been much worse. The fact that everyone lived felt almost impossible. Sarah had spent the past weeks teaching. San Dandai. Widow Hartley attended every session, taking notes, asking sharp questions, absorbing knowledge with the hunger of someone who'd always known there was more to learn. Other women came too, mothers wanting to better care for their families, young women interested in healing work. She taught basic anatomy and hygiene, demonstrated proper wound cleaning, explained how diseases spread and how to prevent transmission, showed them which symptoms required immediate attention and which could be monitored at home. In Senkotaronfa, you're giving away your knowledge, Thomas had observed one evening. Knowledge grows when it's shared. Sarah had replied, and if something happens to me, this town will still have people who know how to help. That's worth more than keeping secrets. And now, as she organized her supplies, Sarah heard a knock at the clinic door. Come in. A young woman entered, maybe 19, with nervous eyes. Sarah recognized her, the banker's daughter, one of the families who'd opposed Sarah's acceptance, Miss Foster. Sarah said gently, "How can I help?" The girl twisted her hands together. "I need advice. Medical advice. And I don't know who else to ask." "You can ask me. Whatever you say stays between us. My mother says I shouldn't be here, says you're not a proper doctor. Your mother's entitled to her opinion." Sarah gestured to a chair. "But you came anyway. That took courage." The girl sat, and slowly, haltingly, shared her concerns. Sarah listened, examined, advised. When the girl left 20 minutes later, her face showed relief. "Thank you, Dr. Brennan," she whispered. "And I'm sorry for what my mother said, for how our family treated you. You're not responsible for your mother's choices, only your own." After the girl left, Sarah stood at the window, watching the town move through its daily rhythm. Children played in the street, Emma and Timothy among them, healthy and boisterous. The blacksmith worked his forge. Thomas rode past on his way to help a neighbor with fence repair. Daniel perched behind him on the horse. Her family, her town, her home. The door opened again. Widow Hartley entered, carrying a basket. Brought you lunch. You've been working since dawn. I have patients to see this afternoon, and you need to eat." Margaret set the basket down firmly. "Doctor's orders from someone who's been doing this longer than you." They ate together, talking about cases and techniques. Margaret mentioned she'd been approached by women from Silver City, asking if she'd teach there too. Seems word's spreading, she said with satisfaction. About our town's lady doctor. Hai. Our doctors. Sarah corrected. Plural. Margaret smiled. I like the sound of that. That evening, Sarah walked home as the sun set in shades of gold and orange. The heat had finally broken. Autumn was coming, bringing cooler air, and the promise of harvest. She found Thomas and Daniel in the garden, pulling the last of the summer vegetables. Daniel ran to her, excited to show her a particularly large tomato. Look, Mama, it's huge. Mama! He'd been calling her that for weeks now. Unconsciously. Naturally. Each time. It struck her with fresh wonder. It's beautiful. Sweetheart, we'll make sauce with it. Ja, I guess du. Thomas straightened, wiping dirt from his hands. How was the clinic, yo? Busy as good. She paused. Miss Foster came by. His eyebrows rose. The banker's daughter. That took nerve. That's what I told her. They worked together preparing supper, moving around each other with the ease of partners who'd found their rhythm. How won't be so schön? Daniel chattered about his day he'd been helping at the general store, earning pennies for candy. After the boy went to bed, Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch. Stars were emerging in the darkening sky, countless and brilliant. You happy? Thomas asked quietly. Sarah considered the question. A month ago, she'd arrived here intending to hide, to diminish herself, to be acceptable rather than authentic. Now she was openly practicing medicine, teaching, serving her community. She had a husband who respected her skills, and a son who loved her without reservation. Yes, she said simply. I am. Thomas took her hand. Good, because I need to tell you something. Her heart jumped. What? I love you. He said it plainly, without flourish, not just grateful, not just appreciative. I love you. The woman who heals and teaches, the woman who risks everything to save children, the woman who's brave enough to be herself even when it's hard. Sarah's eyes filled. I love you too. I didn't expect to, but I do. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge. Inside, Daniel slept safely. In town, children played and families rested easy. The epidemic finally passed. Sarah thought about the trunk in their bedroom, now standing open. Her medical bag sat on the shelf in the kitchen, readily available. Nauerd's owner, the Malvinayan. Her textbooks lined a small bookcase Thomas had built for her. All the pieces of herself. No longer hidden. No longer sources of shame. Just tools for healing. Just parts of who she was. The lamp burned bright in the window, not a dim, fearful light anymore, but a beacon. A signal that help was available. That this house held a healer. That anyone who needed care was welcome. Sarah had come west to hide herself. Instead, she'd found the one place where all of her doctor, teacher, wife, mother could exist together, openly, without apology. She'd found home. Autumn painted the prairie in shades of amber and rust. The air turned crisp at night, promising winter, but not yet delivering its bite. Sarah had been in Redemption Flats for 3 months, and the transformation felt both monumental and quietly natural. The clinic saw steady patients. Most came for minor ailments, coughs, sprains, questions about persistent aches. But the real victory was in prevention. The hygiene practices Sarah had taught were taking root. Mothers boiled drinking water, Families quarantined sick members to prevent spread. Children washed hands before eating. Small changes, but they saved lives. This morning, Sarah was teaching a group of 6 women advanced first aid techniques. Widow Hartley assisted. Demonstrating on a stuffed dummy the blacksmith had sewn, the women asked questions, took notes, practiced bandaging techniques on each other. What about burns? One asked. My husband works the forge. Sarah explained assessment and treatment, showed them how to recognize severity, when to seek help and when to manage at home. She loved this, the teaching, the sharing, the sense of knowledge multiplying outward like ripples in a pond. When the lesson ended, Margaret lingered. Got news, she said. Doc Carson from Silver City wants to meet you. Says he's heard about the lady doctor who beat scarlet fever and wants to compare notes. Really? Sarah felt a flutter of excitement. Professional respect from a male physician. Something she'd rarely experienced. Really? He'll be through next week. Margaret grinned. Seems you're building quite a reputation. Dr. Brennan. That afternoon, Sarah made house calls. The grocer's son needed a checkup, fully recovered. Growing strong. Emma got a clean bill of health, though Sarah reminded Helen about the importance of rest and good nutrition. At the last house, she found a surprise. The banker's wife, Mrs. Foster, stood at her door with a covered dish. Mrs. Brennan, she said stiffly. I brought pie. Sarah accepted it cautiously. That's kind of you. It's an apology. The older woman's face worked. Pride battling conscience. My daughter told me how you helped her. How gentle you were. How you didn't judge her for coming. Despite our family's attitude, I would never turn away someone who needs help. I know that now. Mrs. Foster met her eyes. I was wrong about you. Took me too long to admit it. But there it is. You're a good doctor. More than that, you're a good woman. I'm sorry for making things harder than they needed to be. Sten. Sarah felt the knot of old resentment loosen. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Will you come to dinner next week? My husband wants to meet you properly. And my daughter won't stop talking about you. I think she might want to learn medicine herself. I'd be honored to come. And if your daughter wants to learn, I'd be honored to teach her. Walking home, Sarah felt the last pieces of tension fall away. Not everyone would accept her. There would always be those who disapproved. But enough people had embraced her that the disapproval no longer had power. She found Thomas and Daniel in the yard. They'd built a small fence around Sarah's herb garden plants she'd started growing for medicinal purposes. Daniel was painting the fence white. His tongue stuck out in concentration. What do you think? Thomas asked. Official enough for a doctor's garden. It's perfect. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Sarah felt the simple rightness of the moment. Daniel was reading aloud from a book, stumbling over big words but persistent. A doc on so. Thomas was peeling potatoes, humming tunelessly. Sarah was chopping vegetables, planning tomorrow's clinic schedule in her head. Ordinary domestic life. An extraordinary purpose. Mama, Daniel said, setting down his book. Can I help at the clinic tomorrow? I want to learn doctor things. Of course you can. You'll be my assistant. The boy beamed. Thomas caught Sarah's eye over Daniel's head, and the love in his expression made her breath catch. After Daniel went to bed, Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch as had become their ritual. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead. The lamp burned in the window behind them. Remember the day you arrived? Thomas asked. You looked so nervous, like you were bracing for something to go wrong. I was terrified. Sarah admitted. I thought any moment someone would discover what I was and send me away. And now I know that what I am is exactly what this town needed. What you and Daniel needed. What I needed. Thomas pulled her close. You going to keep teaching? Keep building up other healers? As many as I can. The frontier's growing. Towns are spreading. They all need doctors. Need people with medical knowledge. I can't be everywhere, but I can teach people who will spread out and help their own communities. That's ambitious. That's necessary. She leaned against him. I spent so long thinking my knowledge was a burden, something that made me unmarriageable, unacceptable. But it was always a gift. I just needed to find people who could see that. We see you. Thomas said simply, all of you. And we're grateful for every part. Thought, the prairie wind carried the scent of harvest, of earth preparing for winter's rest and spring's renewal. Sarah thought about her journey from St. Louis in shame, to Redemption Flats in hiding, to this moment of complete belonging. She'd traveled west carrying two identities, the woman she'd been and the woman she'd promised to become. But they'd always been the same person, doctor and healer, wife and mother, teacher and student, strong and vulnerable, brave and afraid, all of it, all of her. The trunk in the bedroom stood open now, its contents freely available. Her medical texts were being borrowed and read. Her instruments were used daily. Her knowledge was no longer a secret to protect, but a resource to share. And every evening, the lamp in the window burned bright, a signal to anyone who needed help that a healer lived here. A healer who'd learned that hiding your gifts serves no one, but offering them freely transforms communities. Sarah had come to Redemption Flats seeking acceptance through concealment. Benati Ba'aka. Instead, she'd found it through revelation. She'd discovered that true belonging doesn't require you to diminish yourself. It invites you to expand. Chetoy, to be fully, authentically, courageously who you are. The prairie had taught her that. This town had shown her. Thomas and Daniel had loved her into believing it. And now, with autumn stars wheeling overhead and her family sleeping safely inside, Sarah Brennan, doctor, wife, mother, teacher, healer, finally understood what home meant. Not a place where you hide your true self, but a place where your true self can finally, fully breathe.